Paul told me something surprising right after we got home from my mom's funeral. "I will take care of the inheritance for you. Be thankful. Less than text if you don't like it. We can get a divorce." I was shocked and didn't know what to say after hearing his words. There were 3 papers on the desk in front of me, and looking at them, I decided to get a divorce from him. Paul thought he would get an answer right away, but when I told him my choice calmly, he seemed confused. He really seemed to think I would just say yes to his terms without asking anything. I didn't pay attention to how he reacted. I packed my things and left the house. I was ready to begin the next part of my life and follow my plan. I'm Laura Bush, and I'm 31 years old. My husband, Paul, is 36 years old and has a job at a bank. We have been married for 6 years, and in that time, I have helped him as a homemaker. Those 6 years have not been happy at all. Paul has a job at a local bank that is having money problems. He doesn't really care about his job and only does what he needs to meet his goals, which has made him feel alone at work. One time after I picked him up from a work party where he had too much to drink, I heard him telling a younger coworker, "Why work hard? Just doing what you have to do and getting a good paycheck is fine." I thought, you're the last person who should give advice because of his attitude at work. Paul has always been lazy and thinks he is better than people who work hard. He always thinks about how to get through the day with the least amount of work. He makes fun of people who work hard for promotions and doesn't have any motivation or goals. His coworkers and younger team members don't show him respect, and he often talks about how he feels treated at his job. I am a freelance painter, and Paul liked my work when we were together. After we got married and he found out how much I make, he acted very differently. "Is it possible to be a painter and not make any money? Your skills are very different from those of someone who paints just for fun," he'd say. His kind words became mean comments. On days when his job was tough, he would take his anger out on me, making me feel like I didn't matter. "It's great that you can paint by yourself. No one disturbs you. At work, I keep getting complaints all the time. Why not look for a job that pays more?" His constant criticisms made me doubt everything. I often thought about quitting my job as a painter, but I continued because of the people who appreciated and bought my art. Women would say to me, "My husband loved the painting I gave him for his birthday," and couples often bought my work to make special memories for their kids. Thanks to these nice customers, I kept painting every month, even though Paul always criticized me. I worked in the living room, which was a bright and calm place. When I opened the windows, fresh air came into the room, making it a great place for my work. My mom bought this house for me so I could concentrate on my art. I loved the living room. It was calm and had a nice view from the window. Sometimes just looking outside helped me think of new ideas for my paintings. But Paul began to come into the living room more, even though I said it was my workspace. "Hey, I'm doing my job here," I told him. "I understand it's your day off, but I've requested that you don't come in while I'm painting. I am having trouble focusing." He would still come in suddenly, and most of the time it wasn't for anything important. He would talk about his job or make funny remarks. It was difficult for me to concentrate. I asked him to go to another room, but he didn't listen to my request. Paul gave a teasing look. "Who do you think you are talking to? I can relax anywhere I like. I'm the one helping you." He'd always talk to me like he was better than me because he made more money than I did. This behavior began after I opened a joint account because he asked me to. After he saw my income and savings, he acted very differently than he did before we got married. "I thought you could have a nicer life," he said one day. "I can't believe you're the daughter of a woman who has her own business. Your mom might feel sad about having a daughter who is not doing well. She might have wanted to give the company to you, but she saw that you couldn't manage it, so she gave it to someone else." I felt really angry and hated him. He thought he was better than me because I made less money and always made fun of me. Because of his salary, I could keep painting without money problems. I started to really think about taking over my mom's business. I talked to her about it, and I chose not to take over. She said, "You don't have to spend your life trying to make your parents happy. I'm glad if you chase your dreams. If you feel good, that's all that matters to me. Your dream is also my dream." Her kind words made me want to follow my love for painting. But Paul never got what my mom was thinking. Every time we discussed it, it became a long and exhausting argument. In the end, I saw that it wasn't worth it, so I quit arguing with him. I acted like I was listening while he talked about whatever he wanted. In the 6 years of our marriage, I found out that if I only half listened and didn't really get involved, I could keep from getting frustrated. When Paul saw that I wasn't paying attention, he would click his tongue, stop talking, and walk out of the room. I told myself to ignore his behavior because he wasn't being physically violent. But everything changed after a big event in life. My mom, who was living in a care home, has died. She was a famous CEO of a leading car company in the USA. While she was in charge, the company hired more than 8,000 people and became very well known for its good reputation. When I was 29, she chose to stop working. She was thinking about the future and had planned to give the company to me. But she supported my dream of being a painter and gave the company to her best friend, Kate Winslet. Kate and I have been friends since we were kids, almost like we are family. We lived close to each other, and my mother trusted her deeply. However, Paul had no idea Kate was my best friend or that she lived nearby. This was because Kate had specifically asked me not to tell him. "There's no need to bring up old school connections," she said one day. Kate approached me with concern. "I've been hearing about your situation with Paul, and I'm worried about you." "I thought it was time we talked," she said. Back in high school, Paul and Kate attended the same school but were in different classes. They only knew each other by name. Paul had gained a reputation for his bad behavior, which made Kate uneasy about him. Even now, her concerns left me thinking deeply about my life and my choices. I was never in the same class as Paul. Kate said, "So I only heard things about him." From what I heard, he often argued with teachers in class. The kids in his class used to say lessons could hardly continue because of him. Kate always made sure to visit me when Paul wasn't home to avoid meeting him. She had attended our wedding, but since she changed her last name after marriage, Paul didn't realize she was the same person he knew from high school. To this day, Paul has no idea that Kate is my best friend. He shows little interest in my personal life, so even though I've told him I have close friends, he's never been curious enough to ask more. "I don't need you to report everything to me," he once said. So I never brought Kate up again. In high school, I also heard bad rumors about him when it came to money. Kate continued, "It seemed like he borrowed money from friends often and rarely paid it back. That's one of the reasons I was worried about you. But when I heard he works at a bank and seems to be taking care of living expenses, I felt a little better. Still, I don't know how he would react if he found out I'm the president of your mother's company. So please don't tell him anything about me." Seeing Kate apologize with a nervous smile made me feel guilty too. The Paul I first dated had seemed so different from the person Kate described to me. He appeared responsible, kind, and someone my parents would have approved of. That was my impression when I first met him. I met Paul for the first time at an art exhibition where my paintings were displayed. At that time, I was struggling and unsure about my future as a painter. I even questioned whether I should quit. During that difficult period, I had created a piece that was deeply personal to me. At the exhibition, most people walked past it without stopping, but Paul stood in front of that painting for hours. "Do you like this painting?" I asked him, overwhelmed with happiness. I couldn't help but speak to him after seeing how long he had been staring at it. "I don't know much about art," he admitted, but for some reason, this painting really caught my attention. I didn't even realize how much time had passed. His words surprised me. Paul wasn't an art expert, but his genuine interest in my work touched me. It felt like he understood the emotions I had poured into that painting, and at that moment, I thought he might be someone special. The person I came with already went home, Paul said, still standing in front of the painting. I've been thinking about what the artist felt while creating this. Before I knew it, hours had passed. When I look at this painting, I feel a strange sense of connection. I've never been interested in art before, but this is the first time something has made me feel this way. It's surprising as Paul laughed and scratched his head. I couldn't help but feel charmed. Hearing those words from someone who knew nothing about art lifted the cloud of doubt I had been carrying. Knowing that someone could connect with the feelings I poured into my work brought me immense joy. Moved by his reaction, I told him almost shyly that this was my pain. That moment marked the beginning of our connection. We exchanged contact information, and although Paul wasn't particularly into art, he began attending every one of my exhibitions. "I'd love to see you paint sometime. Where do you work?" he asked one day. His interest in me and my work delighted me, and I found myself wanting to know more about him too. I invited him to my home, and soon after he asked me out. "I want to always be by your side when you're happily painting," he said. It was the first time anyone had confessed their feelings to me like that, and I felt overwhelmed with happiness. I accepted his confession, and that was how our relationship began. I was certain that a bright and happy future awaited us. When I told my parents about Paul, they were thrilled. My mother even shared the news with her friends. "I never thought this day would come for Laura," she said. "She's always been so focused on her paintings that I was worried she didn't care about men at all." Really, after I became ill, my biggest concern was her future. Now all that's left is to see her in a bridal gown. At the time, my father had been diagnosed with cancer. He was in the hospital and undergoing painful treatments, but his determination to see me get married gave him strength. Thanks to his resolve, we were able to walk down the aisle together. It felt like he had no regrets left, and just a few days after the wedding, my father passed away. Afterward, my mother's health began to decline. She was heartbroken by the loss of my father and had to be admitted to a care facility. Although there was nothing physically wrong with her brain, her grief was so deep that she never regained her former strength and energy. When I turned 32, she passed away. Her final words were spoken with a peaceful smile. "Your father has finally come to take me with him." I struggled to come to terms with my mother's death, so much so that I couldn't even bring myself to paint. Meanwhile, Paul seemed to be in a cheerful mood every day, drinking alcohol and acting carefree. "Finally, I can relax. You'll get the inheritance, right?" It was worth being patient. "Now I'm free," he said one evening, clearly drunk. His words were so shocking that I hoped I had misheard him. "You're drinking too much. What did you just say?" I asked, unable to hide my disbelief. At the funeral, he had been drinking unnecessarily as well, so part of me tried to dismiss it as a drunk joke. But what he said felt too significant to ignore. When I pressed him for an answer, Paul laughed in a way that made my stomach churn. "I've always been nice to your parents to get the inheritance. Pretending to be kind was tough. So what is there? Will you show it to me?" His insensitive words and mocking laugh made my blood boil. How could he act this way when I was grieving the loss of my parents? "Stop it. Don't talk about money right now. It's incredibly disrespectful," I snapped. Normally, I rarely got angry at Paul, but this time I couldn't hold it in. He had never truly supported me in my grief. Instead, he was focused on their inheritance, and it infuriated me. Hearing Paul's selfish and money-driven words reminded me of the things Kate had told me about his high school days. She had mentioned bad rumors about his dealings with money, like borrowing from friends and never paying it back. I realized that what she said wasn't just a rumor, it was the truth. At that moment, my feelings for him began to fade rapidly. "What's wrong with you all of a sudden? You're making even the good wine taste bad," Paul said, completely ignoring how inappropriate his behavior was. His dismissive words only added to my anger. I had been telling myself for years not to pay attention to his sarcastic remarks, believing he cared about my parents. But now I wondered if everything, his interest in my paintings, our relationship, even our marriage, had all been an act to get his hands on the inheritance. The next morning, Paul shocked me even more. I walked into the living room and saw him awake earlier than usual, sitting on the couch. He was completely sober and looked serious, which was unusual. Surprised, I stared at him as he motioned for me to sit down across from him. "We need to talk," he said, his tone calm but firm. I sat on the couch as Paul had asked, watching him closely to see what he wanted. Suddenly, he placed a divorce paper and another document that looked like a pledge on the table. He then started a conversation I could hardly believe. "I've sobered up and want to talk seriously about our future. Have you checked your mother's will?" he asked. I was stunned that he brought up the inheritance again just a day after his awful comments. Had none of my words from yesterday gotten through to him? I still couldn't tell if what he said before was a drunken joke or if he meant every word. Either way, it was unforgivable. He had disrespected my parents, and I would never excuse it. "I told you yesterday not to talk about money," I said, my voice filled with anger. "My mother just passed away, and you don't think it's insensitive. Even if you were drunk, how could you say those things about my parents?" "Keep your voice down," Paul said, showing no sign of remorse. "Was it so bad to pretend to like your parents? It had to be done." "What does that even mean?" I asked, furious at his ridiculous excuses. When I pressed him further about his behavior the previous day, Paul only became more defiant. "What's wrong with what I said?" he asked, as if he truly didn't understand. His lack of sincerity and his dismissive attitude made it clear he didn't care about my feelings. The conversation was going nowhere, so I tried changing the subject. "I haven't checked the will yet," I said. "There's so much to do. I haven't even started going through my mother's belongings. Why can you only think about money right now?" Paul ignored my question and pushed the document toward me anyway. "Anyway, I need you to look at this pledge and sign it." Confused, I picked up the paper and started reading. My heart sank as I realized what it said. The pledge stated that I would hand over all decisions regarding the inheritance to Paul and would not interfere. If I broke this agreement, it would result in divorce. I was speechless. The contents of the document were shocking. Paul leaned back, completely unfazed. "It's simple," he said. "I'll handle the inheritance for you. Be grateful. If you don't like it, we can get divorced. We're married, so the inheritance you receive is basically mine anyway. I'll do what I want with it." Hearing those words, something inside me snapped. I felt a cold, unshakable resolve take over. "Understood," I said quietly, keeping my face down. I did not sign the pledge. Instead, I made up my mind to take a different path. I stood up, walked to my room, and began packing my things to leave immediately. "Where are you going? Aren't you going to sign the pledge? If not, it's divorce. You know, don't ignore me," Paul shouted. "I know we're getting a divorce," I said firmly. "That's why I can't stay here anymore. I'm getting ready to leave." "What are you talking about?" he asked, completely stunned. Clearly, he thought I would quietly sign the pledge without arguing. His shocked expression almost made me laugh. "Do you even understand what you're saying? Are you seriously talking about divorce? You're joking, right?" he asked, trying to make sense of it. This is no joke. You're the one who brought it up. Remember? Now I'm preparing to leave, so please get out of my way, I said coldly. Years of pent-up anger surged inside me. Learning Paul's true nature during his drunken confession was bad enough, but the pledge was the final blow. After everything, there was no reason to stay in this marriage. As I packed my bags, Paul tried to stop me, panicking, but I ignored him. He seemed too overwhelmed to think clearly. I secretly took the divorce papers, determined to leave the home I had lived in for the past 6 years. As I walked out, I said, "Thank you for everything up until now." "Hey, wait," Paul called after me, but I didn't stop. I got into a car I had arranged in advance and headed straight to my parents' house. Later, I decided to execute the next step of my plan. The following day, I visited the bank where Paul worked. As soon as I arrived, people seemed surprised to see me. "You're Mrs. Bush, right?" an employee asked. "Paul is on leave to handle estate matters. I apologize for the sudden visit. I need to speak with the branch manager. Is he available?" I replied politely. Soon I was led to the branch manager's office. He greeted me with a smile. "Hello, Mrs. Bush. It's been a while. What brings you here today?" I smiled back briefly. "I apologize for showing up unannounced. Also, I'm no longer Mrs. Bush. Paul and I are already divorced, and I need to discuss something important with you." The news of our divorce caused a stir among the bank staff. Ignoring the whispers around me, I calmly continued. "I'd like to close all my accounts," I said. "That includes both my high-value and regular savings accounts. This will likely be my last visit to this branch." The branch manager looked confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, clearly not expecting such a statement. Nearby employees overhearing the conversation must have sensed something serious. It wasn't long before someone contacted Paul. Paul arrived at the bank, out of breath, his clothes wrinkled and his hair messy. "Wait, what are you doing?" he called out as he rushed in. "Paul, please come this way. And Miss Hillary, this way as well," the branch manager said, stumbling over how to address me after the sudden declaration of divorce. He quickly composed himself and led both of us to a private meeting room. The staff exchanged curious glances, whispering to each other about Paul's situation. Ignoring their stares, I followed the branch manager with dignity, not sparing Paul a single glance. Once we were seated in the meeting room, the branch manager addressed me directly. "About your request to close all your accounts earlier, could you tell me the reason?" "As I mentioned, I've divorced Paul," I replied. "I won't be needing the bank services anymore, so I'd like to close all my accounts." "Close the accounts? What are you talking about?" Paul blurted, his voice rising. As I had expected, it was obvious he had no idea what was happening. Since I had spoken directly to the branch manager, his panicked reaction made me sigh. The branch manager stepped in to explain calmly. "Miss Hillary has informed me about your divorce and requested to close all her accounts here. Were you not aware of this?" Paul looked flustered, his voice defensive. "I had no idea about the account closures. As for the divorce, we were still discussing it. I never agreed to it." Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh. Before I could stop myself, Paul glared at me, his expression demanding to know what was so funny. "You might not have agreed to the divorce," I said, meeting his glare, "but I've already filed the papers." "You filed the divorce papers," Paul repeated, stunned. He hadn't realized I had taken the papers to the court. When he heard they had been officially filed, he let out a loud groan. The branch manager looked at me, clearly trying to process the situation. "Yes, Paul," I said coolly. "You're the one who gave me those papers. I told you I wouldn't sign that ridiculous pledge, so I took care of it. This was all your idea." Paul sat there, speechless, as I continued. "We are officially divorced. There's no need to discuss splitting property. The house is in my name since my mother bought it for me. I'm giving you 4 days to collect your belongings and move out. If you don't, I'll involve the police." "But the divorce papers were just meant to get you to sign the pledge," Paul protested, his voice desperate. "Too late for that," I replied. "This is over, Paul. Accept it." "I never meant for the divorce to actually happen. Why did you take the papers to the office? Don't you think that's going too far? And the pledge—" Paul trailed off. The branch manager, who had been silently observing our exchange, seemed to realize the situation was far messier than he had anticipated. He wisely kept his distance, but perked up at the mention of the pledge. "What pledge?" the branch manager asked, directing his question at Paul, who suddenly looked cornered. Paul hesitated, clearly unable to provide a solid explanation. While he may not have been the most capable employee, he likely relied on maintaining good relationships at work. If the details of the pledge came out, it could ruin his reputation and destroy the trust he had built within the company. In the worst case, it might even cost him his job. Seeing Paul squirm, I decided to take charge and explain the situation confidently. "My mother recently passed away," I began. "Paul gave me a pledge stating he would take full control of the inheritance. If I didn't agree, he threatened me with divorce. I couldn't accept those terms, so I filed for divorce instead." "What? No, that's not true." Paul stammered, his voice desperate as he tried to defend himself. "It was just a drunken joke. I wasn't serious. I would never do something like that." Paul's excuses only made things worse. The branch manager's expression grew colder, and the staff nearby exchanged disapproving glances. Paul's behavior had clearly crossed a line, and no one seemed inclined to side with him. Feeling the pressure of the manager's critical gaze, Paul fumbled for a way to salvage his pride. But he was no match for the truth. "I'm telling you I was just joking," I said, my voice dripping with mockery. "You're telling me you signed the divorce papers as a joke. And what about when you admitted you only pretended to be nice to my parents to get their inheritance? Are you going to call that a joke, too?" I smiled at him, knowing his words would only dig his hole deeper. The branch manager turned his gaze toward Paul, his disapproval clear. Paul's face turned pale, and he looked completely bewildered. His desperation to maintain his pride was obvious, but I had no intention of letting him off the hook now. "Please proceed with closing both my regular savings account and the account holding $400 million, I said. At the mention of $400 million, Paul froze. He had likely assumed I was only closing my standard account, which wouldn't have affected him much, but this was different. $400 million, Paul spluttered. Where did that kind of money come from? There's no way your paintings alone could earn that much. "It's not from painting," I said simply. "Painting isn't my only job." "I've never heard about any other job," Paul said, his confusion growing as he stared at me. Watching his bewildered expression, I felt a sense of satisfaction. The life he thought he controlled was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I sighed, pulled a business card from my bag, and handed it to Paul. "This is my real job. Painting is just one of my hobbies." Paul looked at the card, and his face went pale. "This company isn't. This the old hag's company. Wait, you're the CEO. Since when?" he blurted, accidentally insulting my mother. Realizing his mistake, he quickly covered his mouth, glancing nervously at the branch manager. But it was too late. The manager gave him a sharp, disapproving look. "What do you mean? I thought Kate was supposed to be the CEO. What's going on?" Paul stammered, "Kate? Who?" I replied, raising an eyebrow. "You seemed so uninterested in my mother's company, so how do you know Kate is the CEO? Strange, isn't it? You weren't supposed to know." Paul's eyes widened as he realized he had slipped up. He tried to recover, but his forehead was already damp with sweat. I decided to lay it all out. "Did you really think I didn't know you were pursuing Kate for her money? She's my best friend, Paul." "Of course I knew. Kate contacted me recently and told me everything." I pulled out my phone and played a recording Kate had made of a call from Paul. The audio captured Paul trying to persuade Kate to meet him, even suggesting a hotel. The branch manager's eyes widened in shock, and Paul turned ghostly pale, unable to say a word. "You never imagined Kate and I were best friends, did you?" I continued. "If you'd actually paid attention to what I said over the years, you might have figured it out. But you were too focused on scheming for money." I paused, then added with a smirk, "I knew all along that you only approached me for my family's wealth. That's why I never told you I'd taken over the company. Kate's position as CEO was just a formality. I've been running everything from the start. If you had done your homework properly, you might have known. But your lazy habits backfired on you." Paul sat there, completely speechless, as the weight of the situation sank in. The branch manager, who had been quietly watching the exchange, finally spoke. "I'm deeply disappointed in you, Paul. Your behavior toward your wife and her parents is appalling. It also raises serious concerns about your character as an employee. Additionally, losing Miss Laura's accounts would be a significant blow to this branch." Paul panicked and tried to recover. "Branch manager, please give me some time. I'll definitely try to convince Laura to change her mind." I moved my head from side to side. "Just leave it. I won't change my mind, no matter what you say. I'm shutting down my accounts, and that's it." The branch manager looked at me with a thoughtful expression. Then I was surprised when he made a proposal I didn't see coming. "If Paul leaves this branch, will you think about changing your decision to cancel the accounts?" Paul was very surprised. He was surprised when the branch manager suggested getting rid of him. I was surprised too, but I wanted to know more, so I leaned in and listened to what the branch manager was saying. "We would like to keep managing your accounts if we can. Honestly, I'm really tired of how Paul acts. Because of this incident and other problems, we are thinking about letting him go. We care about our clients' trust more than we care about protecting an employee like him. What do you think?" "What do you mean?" Paul suddenly shouted, feeling scared. "Dismissing me like that? I will take the company to court." The branch manager looked at Paul with a steady and serious face. "If you want to take legal action, feel free to do so. As the branch manager, I've received many complaints from employees about how you behave. Less than text if it gets to that point, I will tell the company everything, and we can get lawyers to deal with your wrong actions in court." When Paul saw he had no escape, he stopped talking. His face lost all its color when he finally realized how serious the situation was. Feeling too much, he dropped to the floor, saying, "How did it get to this? Why me?" I looked at him without any feelings. "You've always treated people like tools to achieve your goals, Paul. Your actions led to this result. If you feel regret, it might be a good idea to think about who you are." And with that, my plan for revenge against Paul came to an end. After what happened, Paul lost his job at the bank, and as he said he would, he left my house. He asked me many times to think again about the divorce, but when I acted like I was going to call the police, he stopped trying and went back to his parents' house. I told his parents everything, and they stopped being his family after they found out the truth. Sure, that wasn't the end of it. I talked to a lawyer about what Paul was doing and gathered proof slowly over time. I used this to file a case asking for compensation because he kept trying to take Kate to hotels and acted inappropriately. His bad money habits had already wasted his savings. Now he lives in a small, old flat and works a lot to pay his debts. Right now, I feel calm again. My life is going well and my job is doing great. Each day seems happier and more satisfying. Laura, you got your smile back. One day, Kate said, "You look really happy and your paintings have lots of bright colors now." "Is that true?" I answered with a smile. "It might be because I have a good friend like you." Recently, I have a lot of ideas and my painting is improving a lot. I thought my paintings were even better now. One day, a customer who sold old things was very interested in what I did. As a result, more people began to order my paintings and I finally had my own exhibition. Because of Kate's hard work, the company has grown steadily. It is now a well-known, high-quality car maker around the world. I help Kate with her work and we keep protecting the company my mom left for us.